Well, good morning, Waypoint. I thought I would come outside this morning and find a quiet spot to record, and I'm listening to dogs barking, and somebody's running a chainsaw down the hill, and I hear cars not too far off in the distance, and I'm reminded that in some ways we're getting back, or starting to get back to some normal routines in our lives. And yet at the same time, I don't want to let go of the fact that this has in many ways been a sweet time for us as a community. Praise and prayer nights on Wednesdays have been incredible, just to share with one another what the Lord's doing, what we need Him to do, and would love to encourage you to be a part of those Wednesday night gatherings. And at the same time, we also long for the day when we're back in Queen's University Belk Chapel being together on Sunday mornings. But one thing I want to remind you of this morning is something that Jesus said to the disciples in the Great Commission. It's one of the last verses, one of the last things He said to the disciples before He ascended to heaven after the resurrection. And He said to them in Matthew 28, "Be sure of this, I am with you always." And this morning as we come to worship, no matter what the season is, no matter what's going on in our lives, the promise of Jesus is that He is with us always. And so let's think about that as we come to worship this morning and listen to music and listen to a message. And we just come together as a community online right now, but longing for the day when we're back together again.
We are Ann and Bo Thrift. We have been married for 55 years, have been fortunate enough to live that entire time in Charlotte. We have 2 fine children and 6 grandchildren.
We were young and didn't realize the seriousness, and I don't think many young people do. I don't think you realize the importance of those vows until you have grown together and you realize, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health.
One thing that I will remember that came from my father-in-law was that he said, if you ever have a disagreement, don't try to be the winner. Just accept whatever your spouse wants and go on to the better.
We had no idea what those vows meant, for better, for worse, in sickness and in health, richer and poor. And those vows are really important. As you grow in your love, you realize how important they were. Our love for each other, our love, yes. We have had some bumps along the road. We've had cancer in our family. Our grandson was very ill and had to have a liver transplant, and now we are dealing with Parkinson's. And that journey has been difficult, but with God's help, we know that we are in His hands. Every time Bo says a prayer, and I love this, he says, "Thank you for our good health." And he means it, because we are blessed. We have learned to laugh at each other. I think that's one of the biggest things that you learn, that you have to laugh at yourself and laugh at each other.
This is our third message on marriage in this series called Three-Ring Circus, where we're going to talk about the mission field of marriage. And I thought, what a better place to deliver this message than on a tightrope in my backyard. Because that's often what marriage feels like. It can feel shaky and unstable. And if we're not careful, we might make a wrong step and then suddenly fall. But one of the secrets to finding balance on a tightrope is to take your eyes off of yourself, off of what is directly in front of you, and to set it on a stable point in front of you. That will bring stability to your life. And in marriage, God calls us to take our eyes off of ourselves and to focus on the person that He's put before us. Now, another secret to walking a tightrope is make sure you've got a good guideline. And in some ways, I think the covenant vows we make at our wedding, those become the guideline that steady us through the uncertainty and the instability of marriage. You see, it's easy to talk about how much you love one another as you're preparing for your wedding day. It's easy to feel love and forgiveness and grace on your wedding day. But on your wedding day, you're making the covenant vows and promise that when things get tough, that you will show love and forgiveness and grace. And those vows become the guideline that will carry you through. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, a pastor, was marrying a young couple. And during the marriage ceremony, he looked at them and he said that on this day, It's no longer your love that holds you two together. But now it's your marriage vows that will hold your love together. The vows we make to love and cherish one another will hold us together during the difficult times we face, when we feel like we're walking on a tightrope. Those are the moments when God calls us onto the mission field of marriage. And they can be terribly dramatic and painful and difficult times, or they can also be just mundane Tuesday afternoons. In the Old Testament, there's a story about a prophet named Hosea, who's called by God to marry a woman named Gomer. And in their marriage, I believe he shows the radical nature of the covenant promise. Gomer is an unfaithful wife to him. Yet in the 3rd chapter, on the 1st verse, this is what the Lord says. The Lord said to Hosea, "Go show your love to your wife again. Though she is loved by another and is an adulteress, love her as the Lord loves his people, though they turn to other gods." Hosea is called to love Gomer in the most radical of ways, because that's how God has shown his love to us. And so he calls Hosea to demonstrate a radical love to her in the most dramatic of situations, even though she's been unfaithful. Now, God also calls us to show forgiveness to one another in even the most mundane things. I don't know if you've seen the story of Tim O'Donnell, but he was going to cheer his wife on, she was doing a virtual Ironman bike race a month ago. And so he brings down these trophies to support her. And as he does so, Tim is kind of like me and makes one of the most classic sort of blunders, where he unplugs her from the race. Here, watch this video.
Around 45k in, Tim, we're kind of having a bit of fun, and my lovely husband Tim came in with a couple of my Ironman trophies as motivation, I guess, and was kind of holding them up in the air and kind of cheering for me. And then I said, I'll go around the back so that people can see at home what I'm dealing with in my house. And so he walked around the back of the trainer, and I guess he kicked the cord at the back of the trainer, which unplugged me and basically disconnected me from the Ruby platform.
Now, I can totally relate to Tim, where oftentimes I feel like I do something with the best intentions, and yet they often will fall short and fall flat and create a bigger mess than I ever intended. And yet, even in those mundane, small things, God calls us to show love to one another, to show forgiveness. Paul says it in Ephesians 5:33. He tells husbands, he says, "However, each one of you must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband." Husbands are called to love their wives, and wives are called to respect their husbands. Now, when you hear that, are you quick to say, yes, that's what I need. I need more love from you. Yeah, that's what I need, is I need more respect. Are you focused on what you need? Or are you asking yourself, am I showing enough love to my wife? Am I showing respect to my husband? See, husbands, we're quick to talk about love. Say, I love you to our wives. But then we also say, I love pizza. I love the Panthers. And so it's no wonder that they often feel as though our love is insufficient. And the truth is that feelings beat facts. We can try to argue and prove the facts of our loves, but feelings will always beat facts. And that if she doesn't feel like she's the priority in your life, then she's not. And she needs love. She needs affirmation. She needs approval. And wives, husbands, Paul says, long to be respected. We long to be validated, to be seen as competent. And just as husbands are called to show unconditional love to their wives, wives are called to show unconditional respect. In fact, I like to talk about contra-conditional love and contra-conditional respect. That word there, contra, it means against our condition. That against our condition, we're called to show love and respect to the other person. And so in doing so, we move away from a contractual marriage to a covenantal marriage. A covenant promise that will provide the steady guideline we need to get through the unstable times. But see, most of us live in contractual marriages. Think about a contract. A contract is an agreement between two parties. If you do this, then I will do that. If you take out the trash, then I will unload the dishwasher. If you cook dinner, then I will wash the dishes. Those are our contracts. And the truth about contracts is they're honestly more interested in getting what's in it for me than what's best for us. Contractual marriage is a 50-50 agreement between two people. But a covenant is a promise, a contra-conditional, against their condition. I will show love and respect. A covenant is a promise that no matter what, I will show them the love or the respect they long for. That's why when I'm working with young couples on their marriage ceremony, oftentimes they'll want to write their own vows, but what I've discovered is that when they write their own vows, what they really become are expressions of love in that moment for one another. And so I often encourage them to draw on the traditional vows, because the traditional vows are the covenantal promises between two people, that no matter what the situation, we will remain loving and faithful to each other. Listen to the vows that I use. I take you to be my wife, and I promise. Covenant means promise, and I promise before God and these witnesses. There's a spiritualness to this promise. Before God and these witnesses, to be your loving and faithful husband. There's a relational promise to this that goes, that isn't based on anything back. I promise to be your loving and faithful husband with no conditions, no strings attached, for rich and for poor. No matter the financial situation, the professional situation we find ourselves in, I will remain loving and faithful. In joy and in sorrow. No matter the emotional situation we find ourselves in, we will remain loving and faithful. In sickness and in health. No matter the physical situations we find ourselves in, we promise to remain faithful and loving, as long as we both shall live. That the promise is from this day forward. You see, this is a covenantal promise that we make to another person. It's not a 50-50 contract. You see, marriage is not a 50-50 agreement. Rather, it's a 20-80. Here's what I mean by that. When our spouse is at 20%, we're called to step up our game and get to 80%, to carry the load for them. See, a 50-50 marriage, that's a contract. But a covenantal marriage will be a 20-80, will be a 10-90, will be a 199, that no matter what the situation, we will rise to the occasion and show the love and to show the respect the other person needs, not what they deserve. See, in a contractual marriage, what we will do is if the other person doesn't hold up to their end of the bargain, then we're going to withhold our end. And so we get into this vicious cycle where if they don't respect us, then we're not going to love them. And then if we don't feel loved, we're not going to show respect. And so it just becomes this vicious cycle over and over and over again. But the only way to break that cycle is we have to show them the love they don't deserve, or the respect they haven't earned from us. We have to reverse the flow of that we show them love, and we show them respect against the condition, against what they've done. That our love and our respect aren't based on their actions, but are gifts God has given us. And so how do you reverse that flow? You have to be the first person to make that move. You have to step onto the hard mission field of marriage and be the first one to show love or to show respect, to reverse the trend that way. And the problem, the challenge for us is, in order to do that, we have to find love and respect that will satisfy us. We have to look to God to give us the love and respect our hearts long for, and that then frees us up to show that to another person. But oftentimes we look for it in our marriage and we become totally disappointed and dissatisfied because the other person can't live up to that. Gary Thomas, in his book Sacred Marriage, he says it well when he writes, "Marriage creates the opportunity for us to be reminded of our need for God. When we become disillusioned by the inability to receive all the love we need and desire from fellow humans, we suddenly realize that our partner can never live up to that standard, that the love we need, the respect we need, has to come from God and God alone." And then he says, marital dissatisfaction is best met with the prayer, "That's why I need you, O God." It's to turn our attention to our need for God's love, to satisfy that longing within us. And suddenly we discover that my satisfaction and dissatisfaction with my marriage has far more to do with my relationship with God than it does with my spouse. We suddenly realize that if we're not receiving the love and respect that we need from God, our Father, then we'll never be able to show it to our spouse effectively. And so we have to discover God's love for us first. That's why in 1 John it says, God first loved us. We are able to love because God first loved us. God was the one to make the move first towards us, to show us the love and the respect we need, even though we don't deserve it. Paul captures it in Romans 5 when he writes in the 6th verse, You see, at just the right time, exactly at that moment that we need, when we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. At the right time, Christ died for you and for me, to show us the love, to show us the respect we long for. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous man, though for a good man someone might possibly dare to die. But God demonstrated his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Contra to our condition, we were sinful. God does not wait for us to live up to our end of the bargain, but rather he comes to us. He makes his move first to us to show us the depth of his love, to satisfy that deepest longing within ourselves, which then frees us up to go on to the mission field of marriage and to show that love to another person. Thanks be to God. Amen. So I want to invite you for a moment just to reflect on God's love for you. Consider that at just the right time, while you were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. How can you dwell in God's love so that you can then more effectively show that love to your spouse? So the coordinates this week are for the mission field you find yourself in. If you're married, how can you show love and respect to your spouse? And if you're not married, who is someone God's placed in your life that deserves your love and your respect? So your action step. In order to show love and respect, I am going to. And now may God the Father watch over you. May Jesus Christ show you the steady way home. And may the Holy Spirit fill you with that love and respect we so desperately need. Y'all have a great week.